What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Inside You, the college sports podcast. I'm your host, Xavier Audick, and we are back to discuss another huge topic in college sports, probably the biggest topic over the weekend, and that is that Nick Bosa, the former Ohio State defensive end, is a team player. I repeat, he is a team player. In case you haven't been following, here's the deal. Nick Bosa entered the season one of the most highly rated NFL draft prospects. However, unfortunately, he suffered a core muscle injury in one of Ohio State's games. Following that injury, initially, head coach Urban Meyer came out and said that he would have a timetable of roughly 2 to 3 weeks to return. Since then, Nick Bosa and also former Ohio State player Joey Bosa's father came out and said that actually his timetable was more like 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the recovery period. He said it was a major surgery, it was going to require serious rehab, and because of that, the timetable for return from injury was longer than head coach Urban Meyer initially had said. Now, looking at this thing, we have to take a step back and look at it objectively. The only reason a guy like Nick Bosa or Joey Bosa or any player at that level goes to an Ohio State or a Texas or a Notre Dame or a Michigan is because they feel that that school gives them the best chance of making it to the NFL or turning themselves into the best possible NFL prospect. In Nick Bosa's case, he already consistently rates as the number one ranked defensive lineman in his class. Furthermore, he consistently ranks as the number one prospect overall, even ahead of Houston defensive lineman Ed Oliver. So, Nick Bosa has already done everything possible to not only turn himself into a legitimate NFL prospect, but also increase his draft stock to as highly as possible. This is distinct from other former players who decided to forgo that last few games. For example, in the case of Bryce Love, the Stanford running back, Love, up until last season and his ankle injury, was very much a first-round prospect. In fact, he probably would have been one based on a performance had there just simply not been a gluttony of highly rated quarterbacks and receivers and running backs in front of him like Saquon Barkley. So, in Love's case, since that injury, he has not looked the same. He needs to now play his way back into that number one spot. Then you have a guy like Leonard Fournette, who was, to quote the timeless classic, the program, hurt, not injured. He ultimately did end up playing in LSU's bowl game, and it did not cost his draft stock, very fortunately. Then you have a guy like Marcus Lattimore, who people like to forget about, but he was a legitimate first-round prospect at South Carolina before suffering a massive knee injury in their game against Tennessee, which then had him fall to a fourth-round pick. Finally, we have Christian McCaffrey, who is the most akin to Nick Bosa's situation in that McCaffrey chose to forgo Stanford's bowl game, ultimately instead deciding to just move and prepare for the NFL draft. Similar to Bosa, just like McCaffrey had already done everything he could to turn himself into the best possible prospect. The only thing that could have resulted from him playing in that bowl game, which was not an important bowl game in the grand scheme of things, was a possible injury which could have tanked his draft stock. In the case of Nick Bosa, especially following Ohio State's surprising loss to Purdue this past weekend, Ohio State's chances of making the playoff are now very much in doubt. They have a tough game against Michigan still to play, and that is at Michigan. And if the Wolverines were to win that game, that would all but end the Buckeyes' chances of making the playoff. So, in summation, Nick Bosa has already done everything he possibly could to turn himself into the best possible draft prospect. He's contributed to the Ohio State program and to its storied history. He's worked hard for Nick Saban, and now it's time for him to get paid. That has nothing to do with him being a team player. It just has to do with him being smart.